Well, today with Matthew chapter 13, we're going to get into a lot of the parables that Christ taught. So let's jump in and get started. Verse 1. The same day went Jesus out of the house and sat by the seaside. And great multitudes were gathered together unto him, so that he went into a ship and sat, and the whole multitude stood on the shore. Now, just before we get into these teachings, it's important to realize that that so he's going out. There's so many people that he's decided to go out onto the sea a little bit, basically to use a boat to preach from, so that more people can gather around the shoreline. Now, some of the people that I've talked with that have been to this area say that there is a bit of an acoustics to the area, where if you are out on the sea, you can hear pretty good. Like people can hear you. There's some really good acoustics in the area. So Jesus was probably able to get his message across to a lot of people pretty quickly, just because of how that worked out for that area, basically. So let's get into verse 3 here. And he says, And he spake many things unto them in parables, saying, Behold, a sower went forth to sow. So you probably already know what parable we're coming up to. This is the parable of the sower. There's some other names for this parable as well, which is interesting. But let's go through this parable, and then we can talk about it for a second here. So he says, verse 4, And when he sowed, some seeds fell by the wayside, and the fowls came and devoured them up. Some fell upon stony places where they had not much earth, and forthwith they sprung up, because they had no deepness of earth. And when the sun was up, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away. And some fell among thorns, and the thorns sprung up and choked them. But other fell into good ground and brought forth fruit, some an hundredfold, some 60-fold, some 30-fold. So that's the parable. Now, the next verse, verse 9 says, Who hath ears to hear, let him hear. And we've mentioned this one already. Excuse me. That when people say that, who hath ears to hear, let him hear, who hath eyes to see, let him see, that is kind of a code word to look for in the New Testament for prophecy, for hidden messages, for there's more to this than what you're reading. Basically, there's some more things in there. So let's talk about this a little bit more. I have a quote here from James E. Talmage. He has a lot to say about these parables. We're going to quote him quite a bit. But he said about this parable here, he says, Though commonly known to us as the parable of the sower, the story could be expressively designated as the parable of the four kinds of soil. So that's another way to think about this parable. Is it's not so much about the sower sowing the seed, but we think about it that way because that's how it starts. But in a way, this is a parable of four different kinds of soil. He says, It is the ground upon which the seed is cast, to which the story most strongly directs our attention, and which so aptly is made to symbolize the softened or hardened heart, the clean or the thorn-infested soil. Observe the grades of soil given in the increasing order of their fertility. 1. The compacted highway, the wayside path on which, save by a combination of fortuitous circumstances practically amounting to a miracle, no seed can possibly strike root or grow. 2. The thin layer of soil covering an impenetrable bedrock, wherein seed may sprout yet can never mature. 3. The weed-encumbered field capable of producing a rich crop, but for the jungle of thistles and thorns. And 4. The clean, rich, mold-receptive, and fertile. Yet even soils classed as good are of varying degrees of productiveness, yielding an increase of 30, 60, or even 100-fold with many integrations. Introgradation, excuse me. Some Bible expositors have professed to find in this splendid parable evidence of decisive fatalism in the lives of individuals, so that those whose spiritual state is comparable to the hardened pathway or wayside ground, to the shallow soil on stony floor, or the neglected, thorn-ridden tract, are hopelessly and irredeemably bad, while the souls who may be likened unto good soil are safe against deterioration and will be inevitably productive of good fruit. Let it not be forgotten that a parable is but a sketch, not a picture finished in detail, and that the expressed or implied similitude in parabolic teaching cannot logically and consistently be carried beyond the limits of the illustrative story. In the parable we are considering, the teacher depicted the varied grades of spiritual receptivity existing among men, and characterized with incisive brevity each of the specified grades. He neither said nor intimated that the hard-baked soil of the wayside might not be plowed, harrowed, fertilized, and so be rendered productive, nor that the stony impediment to growth might not be broken up and removed, or an increase of good soil be made an actual addition, nor that the thorns could never be uprooted and their former habitat be rendered fit to support good plants. The parable is to be studied in the spirit of its purpose, and strained inferences or extensions are unwarranted. A strong metaphor, a striking simile, or any other expressive figure of speech is of service only when rationally applied. If carried beyond the bounds of reasonable intent, the best of such may become meaningless or even absurd. So a warning to us as you read parables and these types of stories, that sometimes they can be carried too far. Let's make sure we are being sensible and rational with what we're talking about with these. Sometimes they can get a little out of control and we interpret too much into them. So you want to be careful with that when we look at these parables and ideas. Now this parable like we talked about could be called the parable of the four soils, because it's almost more about the receptivity of the soil, and that is equating to us, our receptivity to the gospel message. So there's four ways that we can approach the gospel message that we deal with in our life. So think about this. I sometimes think about this like a personality style. Now, like James E. Talmage pointed out, it can be changed. It doesn't have to stay this way. We sometimes change. Sometimes we are hardened soil, and sometimes we are more receptive soil. Sometimes we could look at it on a principle by principle basis. Some principles were more readily accepted and other principles are harder to accept. So it's more understanding, how are we treating the gospel message that we're getting, because that's the seed. That's the seed. We are the soil. The seed is the gospel message. So when we look at this, where are we in our lives? What are we doing in our lives? And how can we be better at receiving the gospel message? That's probably the most appropriate question to ask. The thing that's interesting about this one as well, we think of four different types of soil. From an LDS perspective, there are four endpoints for our existence. Three kingdoms, one outer darkness type idea that kind of fit in with this. So there's kind of the parable is based on your receptivity. This might match up with, if you stay this way and don't change, you'll kind of end up over here. So another way to think about that parable, basically, some interesting ideas. Now, let's get into understanding this a little bit better. Verse 10, and the disciples came and said unto him, why speakest thou unto them in parables? So this could be his disciples are on the boat with him, helping him, and they're like, hey, master, why do you teach in parables? Or maybe this is later on after he's taught that parable, and they're coming to him going, help us understand this. Why do you do this? In verse 11, he says, he answered and said unto them, because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. So there's a purpose behind these. There's a deeper meaning, and the people aren't ready to hear the deeper meaning, but the apostles are. Verse 12, for whosoever hath, to him shall be given, and he shall have more abundance. But whosoever hath not, from him shall be taken away even that he hath. So he's still talking about why he's doing these parables. Now Joseph Smith translation says, for verse 12, for whosoever receiveth, to him shall be given, and he shall have more abundance. But whosoever continueth not to receive, from him shall be taken away even that he hath. So a little bit of clarification on that verse, realizing that the more The more we are the fertile soil, the more we are receptive, open and willing to accept new ideas into our understanding, new truth, to keep improving ourselves as we study the gospel, we will have an opportunity to gain more, to get more in our life. If we are not receptive to the gospel message, if we're not receptive to the improvements in the truths, then we will lose what we already have been given as well. It'll go down. So that's this idea that Christ is trying to get across, that you're going to understand these parables at the level that you are spiritually prepared for them. So if you're not spiritually prepared, you're not going to get much out of them. If you do have that spiritual preparedness to receive more, you'll start to get more abundance from them. Now, verse 13, he says, "Therefore speak I to them in parables, because they seeing see not, and hearing they hear not, neither do they understand." So remember, we talked about that, seeing and, who has ears to hear, let him hear. Who has eyes to see, let him see. That means there's hidden messages. There's mysteries in the message. And what he says in verse 13 is basically the people don't understand. They don't have that capacity to pick up those mysteries yet. So they don't catch on. But they will at some point. And that's good. Now, verse 14, "And in them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah, which saith, By hearing ye shall hear, and shall not understand, and seeing ye shall see, and shall not perceive. For this people's heart is waxed gross, and their ears are dull of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest at any time they should see with their eyes, hear with their ears, and should understand with their heart, and should be converted, and I should heal them." Or basically heal our souls from the wounds of our sins is probably a more appropriate way to say that in verse 15. So we could look at this and say, okay, what kind of soil, what kind of receptivity are these people? Probably the ones with the briars and thorns, probably the ones with the compacted soil. We could probably say those two are probably more likely to be the ones that the people in Jesus' time are experiencing. But those that are more open, the more fertile soils, the opportunities to listen and learn, are better prepared and are going to learn more from his messages. Back verse 16, he says, "But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear." So these apostles are more receptive. And so they're better prepared to catch the deeper meanings and understand things better. Verse 17, "For verily I say unto you that many prophets and righteous men have desired to see those things which ye see, and have not seen them, and to hear those things which ye hear, and have not heard them." So prophets have looked forward to the day of Christ. They thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice to be alive while Christ is on the earth, to hear his messages, to sit at his feet, to discuss things with him. How cool would that be? And Christ's apostles are getting that chance. They're living at an interesting time for Judaism, for the nation, for Rome and everything else that's going on. But they get the chance to hang out with Jesus and talk with him. And this is something that people, like I said, prophets before looked forward to. They couldn't wait for that day. So verse 18, Christ says, "Hear ye therefore the parable of the sower." So now he's going to give more explanation about the parable. Verse 19, "When any one heareth the word of the kingdom and understandeth it not, then cometh the wicked one and catcheth away that which was sown in his heart, which is he, this is he which received the seed by the wayside." So these are the people, again, they heard the word, but they understood not the word. So this is the seed that was by the wayside. So next to the road, the hard compacted soil. The seed didn't get in because they didn't understand it. They weren't prepared or open and receptive to learning. Now verse 20, "But he that received the seed into stony places, the same as he that heareth the word, and anon with joy received it. Yet hath he not root in himself, but dureth for a while. For when tribulation or persecution ariseth because of the word, by and by he is offended." So this group, the stony places group, so this is the thin layer of soil on top of the hard bedrock or hard soil, hard rock soil. So the seed comes in, it does get planted. There is some joy and rejoicing there. Yes, this is the gospel message. But then times get tough. Tribulation comes and they go, I don't know if I want to believe this anymore. So then they back out basically and don't believe it. And the seed dies. So that's that section. Now verse 22, he also that received seed among the thorns is he that heareth the word, and the care of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word and become unfruitful. That is a problem. So these are people who they receive the message of the gospel, but they get so wrapped up in peer pressure, they get so wrapped up in worldliness that they do not want to. They get offended by it. They don't want to have to follow it. They want to follow more worldly things. So they agree with it. They know the gospel is true, but they just can't shake. I want to be accepted by the people in this world. I want to be seen as cool and amazing. I want to do the cool stuff. I want to drive the cool cars, have the fancy house, have the nice, important job and things like that. So they get stuck into some problems here. Now, Brigham Young had something interesting to say about this. In fact, he said, I am aware how easy it is for the mind of man to become entangled with the deceitfulness of riches. Matthew 13:22, for I am somewhat experienced in the spirit of the world. How easy it is for the love of the world to take possession of the hearts of the human family. How easy it is for their minds to become darkened by the god of this world. 2 Corinthians 4:4, and become like the eyes of the fool, which are in the ends of the earth. Seeking gold and silver for the riches of grandeur, popularity, and titles of this world, if the religion we possess does not control and reign predominant over every other principle and feeling, we have not been schooled in it so as to learn our lessons correctly. We are not masters of this heavenly science. If the Latter-day Saints have not been schooled enough to realize that all things which pertain to this world, riches, honors, worldly grandeur, and worldly titles, are not wholly subservient to their religion, they are not fully skilled in their profession. So his idea was, while there's a lot of great stuff in this world, realize that it shouldn't become the primary thing, that worshiping God and following God should be primary. So it's great to be famous. It's great to be wealthy. It's great to have lots of money to go on vacations and buy whatever you want and do all these great things. But it should never come at the expense of your relationship with God and your connection with Him and keeping the commandments. So that's the thing to be careful with. Now in verse 23, we're going to get into this fourth one. It says, but he that receiveth seed into the good ground is he that heareth the word and understandeth it, which also beareth fruit, and bringeth forth some 100-fold, some 60, and some 30. So this is where you accept the gospel, you learn the gospel, you put it into practice, you let it work, you keep the commandments, you work on doing good things, and it produces a result. That's the fruit that this is talking about. So now it says here, some people are going to do 100-fold fruit. Some people are going to do 60-fold, some 30-fold. So we're going to get a return. We're going to get that result, but some are going to have better results than others. A question that I think is important for us to look at when we think of verse 23 is, how can we prepare the ground for when the seeds come to be planted? We're not told in here when it's planted. Usually there's a harvest season. There's a time that's appropriate to plant and a time to then nourish them and then harvest them later. But when it comes to the gospel, there necessarily isn't always just a certain time for accepting it, and that's the only time you can accept it. You can accept the gospel at any time, anywhere. So are we always prepared to learn more truth? Are we always ready to it? Or do we sometimes fall into that trap of, hey, I just learned something, it's amazing, and now I'm going to spend the rest of my life defending what I've learned instead of being willing to learn new things? So you want to be careful with that. That happens sometimes. Also, with verse 23, a couple of other great quotes from this. This one is from Irenaeus in his book Against Heresies. He's a second or third century early church father, basically, of Christianity. He said, every gospel version, the challenge, he who hears, let him hear, announcing that something of great importance has been said, follows immediately upon mention. The 3 degrees, 30, 60, and 100, they are the 3 degrees of glory. Verine not unto the world, but only to those who have heard the gospel, understood it, accepted it, brought forth fruit, and persisted with patience. This is the gradation and arrangement of those who are saved, says Irenaeus, citing a doctrine which he attributes to the elders, i.e., those who had been actual hearers of the apostles. The elders say that those who are deemed worthy of it and about in heaven shall go there. Others shall enjoy the delights of paradise, others shall possess the splendor of the city, for everywhere Savior will be seen, according as they shall be worthy to see it. But that there is a distinction between the habitation of those who produce 100-fold, and that of those be produced 60-fold, and that reproduce 30-fold. For the first will be taken into the heavens, the second and the last will inhabit the city. And on this account the Lord said, in my Father's house are many mansions. So Irenaeus sees in this idea, this concept of many mansions. So those who are getting this return, there's different mansions in heaven that kind of equate for that. That's what Irenaeus is thinking about. So really interesting correlation there. Now, Anselm, in his book Homily, said, for whoever is baptized in Christ, to hear in heaven is opened, and God above is ready to receive him. Note that it is baptism that opens the gate, but he must ascend by the steps of a ladder which reaches from baptism up to God. Even so, the children of Israel reached the promised land only by a long journey. So let no one who is baptized be lazy, but let him strive to reach his promised celestial home by the road of God's commandments, and by the steps of the latter generation let him send, yet he desires to reach God. So again, he's talking this kind of idea of there's more than just you accept the gospel and you go to heaven. There's these degrees that happen, the 30-fold, 60-fold, and 100-fold. And so we can see this idea of different degrees of return, different mansions in heaven, like Irenaeus talks about, or like Anselm says, this ladder, this progression that we can go through to come closer to God. So some really interesting ideas of how to think about that parable. Now, verse 24, we're going to get into the next parable. So another parable he put forth unto them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. So you could say this one's the parable of the sowers. This one's actually more of the parable of the wheat and the tares. So verse 25, but while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. And just so you understand, if you've never done anything with agriculture, you've never looked into understanding what this is. So wheat, we understand wheat. That's what we grow to grind up into flour to make pastas and breads with. Tares is a plant that looks like wheat. So it grows up looking like wheat. Until the wheat matures, you won't tell the difference between the tares and the wheat. So you could say tares are an imitation, a fake wheat. You can't grind up the tares to make flour. It looks the same as wheat through the seeds aren't that different. The growth stages aren't that different. It's the maturing phase right at the end when the wheat gets the nice head on it, the big wheat berries and the head on it. The tares won't get that big. And so that's when you can tell the difference, but it has to be fully ripe, has to be matured before you'll know the difference. So this is a problem because tares will devalue the wheat flour. If you grind them up together, it's not going to work out well. You're not going to get a good bread. So they're a big problem. So this enemy came in and, according to the parable, spread a bunch of tares seed through his neighbor's field so that it would ruin his neighbor's field. So verse 26, but when the blade was sprung up and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. So again, they're coming up at the same time. Verse 27, so the servants of the household came and said unto him, Sir, didst thou not sow good seed in thy field? From whence then hath it tares? So they're asking, did you have tares seed in with your wheat seed? Did you get a bad batch of seed or something? Verse 28, and he said unto them, An enemy hath done this. The servants said unto him, Wilt thou then that we go and gather them up? So they're going to go. They're saying, well, let us go and we'll just go start pulling all the tares out of the field. We're going to gather them up and just rip them out, basically. Verse 29, but he said, Nay, lest while ye gather up the tares, ye root up also the wheat with them. So he's wanting to protect his wheat from being destroyed. So by ripping up the tares' roots might be intertwined with the wheat's roots. So as you pull up tares, you may pull up wheat. And maybe you'll mistake the wheat for a tare and pull it up. So this is an interesting point because in a way that you can look at this from a justice standpoint. So the servants are saying, we want to exact justice. We want to clean out the tares and have a better field. So kind of a justification here. But the Lord is saying, no. The problem with this is where justice could go too far and we could condemn the wheat, ruin the wheat in an effort to go after justice against the tares. And we don't want that. The wheat is so valuable, we do not want that. We want to be careful with this. So that is the thing that's going on here. So verse 30, he says, Let both grow together until the harvest. And in the time of harvest I will say to the reapers, Gather ye together first the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. Now, Joseph Smith Matthew makes a point here. He says, First the wheat into my barn, and the tares are bound in bundles to be burned. So the Joseph Smith translation flips the order in verse 30, because verse 30 in the King James Version says, Gather the tares first, then the wheat second. And the Joseph Smith translation says, no, it's gather the wheat first and the tares second. I think that plays into the idea of rapture and other things like that as well. Gather the wheat and then the tares, but we'll see as we go along with these other metaphors how that plays out. Now, so they're getting fully harvest. They're going to wait till they can clearly tell the difference between them. So right after Jesus would bring the gospel, Satan would bring his false version to corrupt the people in the church. And it's going to be that way until the second coming. When the second coming is there, when the earth is prepared for Christ to come again, that's the harvest. That's when things are going to be separated out. That's what's going to happen. So that is a really interesting parable that we look at, this idea of justice, but God's mercy is sparing the people so that they can be better prepared. Those who are ready, the wheat will be better preserved because it'll be the righteousness will be fully ripe. The wickedness will be fully wicked. So if you think about it, what we're looking at here is a polarization. Okay? It's not going to be as much intermingling. There's going to be a separation. People are going to be tested to say, are you a wheat or are you a tare? Are you following God or are you following the world? That's what it comes down to. That's what this life is about. The precursor events up to the second coming are all about the separation, the polarization, so that it's clear who's the wheat, who's the tares, so the wheat can be taken care of and the tares will be dealt with, basically. So the only question to be answered is, are you a wheat or a tare? That's the only question that still needs to be answered. And that's the question that you need to think about. Because only you, between you and God, is who can answer that. Okay, now let's jump to the next one. This is another parable starting in verse 31. Another parable put he forth unto them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is like to a grain of mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field. Now, mustard seed are one of the smallest seeds around. They are extremely tiny seeds. Verse 32, which indeed is the least of all seeds, but when it is grown, it is the greatest among herbs, and becometh a tree, so that the birds of the air come and lodge in the branches thereof. If you've never seen this, like, this is fascinating to think of. This tiny little seed, like just barely there, has the capacity to turn into this massive tree. So fascinating to think about. That the material in this little seed, combined with the nutrients pulled out of the ground, allows it to turn into this huge tree, where even the birds can nest in the tree, basically. So really fascinating, that this idea. Now, James E. Talmage said, it should be known that the mustard plant attains in Palestine a larger growth than in more northerly climes. The lesson of the parable is easy to read. The seed is a living entity. When rightly planted, it absorbs and assimilates the nutritive matters of soil and atmosphere, grows, and in time is capable of affording lodgment and food to the birds. So the seed of truth is vital, living, and capable of such development as to furnish spiritual food and shelter to all who come seeking. In both conceptions, the plant at maturity produces seed in abundance, and so from a single grain, a whole field may be covered. So this is that the seed is a living seed. The gospel is a living gospel. The truth is living. It's important when we plant it inside of us, when we accept gospel truths and teachings into our life, it can grow and produce fruit through us. We're the soil, remember, and it can produce this fruit. When we do good works, we do good things because of that inspiration and guidance that the Spirit is giving to us through accepting the gospel, allows us to be fruitful and to be more supportive and helpful of other people. So that is important for us to look at. How much are we, the more we accept the gospel, the more we pay attention to the truth and do those things, then the more results we can give, the more fruit we can produce through our works and our efforts in blessing the lives of others. That's important. All right, now another parable, verse 33. Another parable spake he unto them, The kingdom of heaven is like unto leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal till the whole was leavened. Now let's talk about this for a second. This leaven is in the idea of growing. So we talked about planting wheat, making flour. When you make bread, you take the wheat flour, you grind the wheat berries down, you make the flour, you combine it with a little bit of salt, you put some water in it, you put some yeast. The yeast is a living organism. It mixes in with it, you have a little bit of sugar in there, it eats the sugars, it creates gases that fill up into the flour, and it creates this rise that goes along with your bread. Without yeast, bread doesn't rise, it stays flat. So that's flat bread, basically. It's unleavened bread. So leaven is yeast. It causes this rise, this expansion of your bread. So this is the story of a woman who's taken the leaven, taken some yeast, and put it in 3 bowls, 3 measures of meal, basically. So all of it is now rising. It's all been leavened. Talmage had this comment to say. He said, points of both similarity and contrast between this parable and the last are easily discerned. In each, the inherent vitality and capacity for development, so essentially characteristic of the kingdom of God, are illustrated. The mustard seed, however, typifies the effect of vital growth in gathering the substance of value from without, while the leaven or yeast disseminates and diffuses outward its influence throughout the mass of otherwise dense and sodden dough. Each of the processes represents a means whereby the Spirit of truth is made effective. Yeast is no less truly a living organism than a mustard seed, As the microscopic yeast plant develops and multiplies within the dough, its myriad living cells permeate the lump, and every bit of the leavened mass is capable of affecting likewise another batch of properly prepared meal. The process of leavening or causing dough to rise by the fermentation of the yeast placed in the mass is a slow one, and moreover as quietly and seemingly secret as that of the planted seed growing without the sower's further attention or concern. So when we think about these ideas, we can look at them and say it's growth. It takes time for that results to be measured. But as we accept the gospel and then we utilize those principles in our daily life, we will see growth. We will see improvements in our life. And that's what this is all about. Now, moving on here, verse 34, all these things spake Jesus unto the multitude in parables, and without a parable spake he not unto them, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet, saying, I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things which have been kept secret from the foundation of the world. So that's getting into Psalms 78. Now, verse 36, then Jesus sent the multitude away and went into the house. And his disciples came unto him, saying, Declare unto us the parable of the tares of the field. So this is now, he said these parables. These are different times he has used these parables. Now his apostles are going to say, help us understand this tares of the field. Remember the one where the enemy came in and sowed the tares seed? So verse 37, he answered and said unto them, He that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man, Christ. Verse 38, the field is the world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one. The enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. As therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so shall it be in the end of this world. The Son of Man shall send forth his angels, and they shall gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity, and shall cast them into a furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Who hath ears to hear, let him hear. So that another warning there again. There's more involved in this. So he's mentioned this, but this is a pattern that, as he's telling this, is not going to be fulfilled for over 2,000 years. So it's an ongoing process. He's trying to help them understand this is an ongoing process that's happening, and we're heading towards the harvest season. There will be a time where it's done growing and nurturing. It's time to harvest. And this is an important thing for us to think of. There is a time where we've had our chance to learn, and then it'll be done. So that's why we do not want to procrastinate our repentance because of that. There is a time. We've talked about that a little bit in the Old Testament as well. There's a point where it says, okay, you're done. You've had your chance. It's time to be done. Justice is now coming in. And that's what it's saying here as well. There will be that harvest time when justice will fully be taken care of. So we want to be careful with that in our own life. Make sure that we are prepared and we have repented, we have improved, we've come to Christ long before that moment. Very important. Okay, now let's see verse 44. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto treasure hid in a field. So this is another parable. The which, when a man hath found, he hideth, and for joy thereof goeth and selleth all that he hath, and buyeth that field. So this guy is going through a field. He sees a treasure, like a big gem, maybe a diamond or a bunch of gold in this field, and then he sells everything he has to buy that field so that he can acquire the treasure. That's it. That's the whole parable, basically. It's kind of a short one. But let's talk about this. So Talmage had some comments on this one too. He says, the quest for treasure trove is always fascinating. Instances of finding buried valuables were not uncommon in the time which we speak, since the practice of so concealing treasure was usual with people exposed to bandit incursions and hostile invasion. Observe that the fortunate and happy man is represented as finding the treasure seemingly by accident, rather than as a result of diligent search. He gladly sold all that he possessed to make possible this purchase of the field. The hidden treasure is the kingdom of heaven. When a man finds that, he ought to be ready to sacrifice all that he has, if by so doing he may gain possession. His joy in the new acquisition will be unbounded, and if he but remain a worthy holder, the riches thereof shall be his beyond the grave. Casuists have raised the question of propriety as to the man's course of action in the story, inasmuch as he concealed the fact of his discovery from the owner of the field, to whom the treasure, they say, rightly belonged. Whatever opinion one may hold as to the ethics of the man's procedure, his act was not illegal, since there was an express provision in Jewish law that the purchaser of land became the legal owner of everything the ground contained. Assuredly, Jesus commended no dishonest course, and had not the story been in every detail probable, its effect as a parable would have been lost. The Master taught by this illustration that when once the treasure of the kingdom is found, the finder should lose no time nor shrink from any sacrifice needful to ensure his title thereto. So that parable is this idea of when we finally come to understand the gospel, we should seek to acquire more of it. We should be willing to sacrifice worldly stuff to say, I want to study the gospel more. I want to learn it more. I want to be closer to God. I want to do more with this gospel. That's what that parable is. And now there's another parable in here, verse 45. And again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a merchant man seeking goodly pearls. So this is a person, a businessman, who's looking for pearls, valuable pearls. Verse 46, who, when he hath found one pearl of great price, went and sold all he had and bought it. So that's similar to what we just learned, basically. In fact, Talmage also had a comment on this one. He said, pearls have always held high place among gems, and long before, as indeed ever since the time of Christ, pearl merchants have been active and diligent in seeking the largest and richest to be had. Unlike the man in the last parable who found a hidden treasure with little or no search, the merchant in this story devoted his whole energy to the quest for goodly pearls, to find and secure which was his business. When at the last he beheld the pearl that excelled all others, though it was, as of right it ought to have been, held at high cost, he gladly sold all his other gems. Indeed, he sacrificed all that he had, gems and other possessions, and purchased the pearl of great price. Seekers after truth may acquire much that is good and desirable, and not find the greatest truth of all, the truth that shall save them. Yet, if they seek persistently and with right intent, if they are really in quest of pearls and not of imitations, they shall find. Men who by search and research discover the truths of the kingdom of heaven may have to abandon many of their cherished traditions and even their theories of imperfect philosophy, and science falsely so called, if they would possess themselves of the pearl of great price. Observe that in this parable, as in that of the hidden treasure, the price of possession is one's all. No man can become a citizen of the kingdom by partial surrender of his earlier allegiances. He must renounce everything foreign to the kingdom, or he can never be numbered therein. If he willingly sacrifices all that he has, he shall find that he has enough. The cost of the hidden treasure and of the pearl is not a fixed amount, alike for all. It is all one has. Even the poorest may come into enduring possession. This is all a sufficient purchase price. His all is a sufficient purchase price. So it's willing to sacrifice. It's willing to give up worldliness to seek the things of God, to study the gospel more. So our time, to put more effort into living the gospel, our efforts, and then helping others to learn it as well and live it. So this is all about priorities. Do we prioritize the things of God over the things of this world? Or do we spend more time worrying about the things of this world than the things of God? You know, if you think about it, Do we take our time to go, oh, I need to take time to read my scriptures? Or do we go, oh, I'm too tired, I need to go to bed? Or, oh, I want to really stay up and watch this movie instead of studying my scriptures. Or I don't want to get up in the morning because I spent all night partying, and so I can't study my scriptures in the morning. Do we let the things of this world get in the way of the things of God? That's the question. And we need to answer that individually. Now, verse 47, again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a net. So this is another parable. That was cast into the sea and gathered of every kind, which when it was full, they drew to shore and sat down and gathered the good into vessels, but cast the bad away. So fishing, they're fishing with a net, like the apostles did. They would probably understand this one really well. So shall it be at the end of the world. The angels shall come forth and sever the wicked from among the just, and shall cast them into the furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. So there's more challenges. There's more things to come. This is similar to the idea that we saw earlier of the wheat and the tares. So these other things, the wheat are those who are seeking the pearl, who are looking for the gospel, who are actively doing things. They are becoming fully ripe by following the commandments and doing more, being proactive in learning and growing in their gospel understanding. The ones who are going the opposite direction, who are following more worldly stuff, are going to be the tares and be destroyed. And so all these parables are coming together to teach this message. In fact, Talmage had a comment on this one as well. He said in here, he said, men of many minds, men good and bad, all rationalities and races are affected by the gospel of the kingdom. The fishers of men are skillful, active, and comprehensive in their haul. The sorting takes place after the net is brought to shore. And as the fisherman discards every bad fish while he saves the good, so shall the angels who do the bidding of the Son of Man separate the just and the wicked, preserving the one kind to life eternal, consigning the other to destruction. Unwise efforts to carry the application of the parable beyond the author's intent have suggested the criticism that whether the fish be good or bad, they die. The good, however, die to usefulness, the bad to utter waste. Though all men die, they die not alike. Some pass to rest, some shall come forth in the resurrection of the just, others go to a state of sorrow and disquiet, there to anxiously and with dread await the resurrection of the wicked. Similarly, if of application in the present parable as in that of the tares is apparent in the emphasis given to the decreed separation of the just from the unjust, and the awful fate of those who are fit subjects for condemnation. A further parallelism is noted in the postponement of the judgment until the end of the world, by which expression we may understand the consummation of the Redeemer's work, subsequent to the millennium and the final resurrection of all who have existed on the earth. So that's pulling these parables together to see that there is a separation, there is a decision. This Abraham 3:25, and the whole purpose of this earth is to see if we'll keep the commandments of God or not. Basically, that's what it comes down to. So what are you doing to move to becoming a wheat versus a tare? That's the only question that still needs to be answered, basically. Let's see. So, verse 51, Jesus kind of checks in with his apostles here. He says, Jesus saith unto them, have ye understood all these things? And they say unto him, yea, Lord. So they're like, okay, we're getting it. We're getting this. Verse 52, then said he unto them, therefore every scribe which is instructed unto the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man that is an householder. So this is another parable, which bringeth forth out of his treasure things new and old. So this is a person who owns an estate, they have a house, they have property, and they're bringing forth out of their treasure things that are new as well as things that are old. So new treasure and old treasure. Verse 53, and it came to pass that when Jesus had finished these parables, he departed thence. Well, at least the end of those parables, I should say, that the discussions that they were having. So this is interesting to think of this last parable. Every scribe which is instructed unto the kingdom of heaven is like this person who is separating out new treasures from old treasures. So a scribe is a religious leader. Your job is to help people understand, well, here's what we did before, but here's the new way of applying things today. So, like a prophet would do that. They would help teach, yes, here's what has been taught in the past, but here's also the new way of teaching. So, this is an idea of continuous revelation, continuous improvements in our understanding of things. Now, verse 54, when he was come into his own country, so probably Capernaum again, he taught them in their synagogue, insomuch that they were astonished and said, whence hath this man this wisdom and these mighty works? Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary, and his brethren James and Joseph and Simon and Judas, and his sisters, are they not all with us? Whence then hath this man all these things? So these are people, this could be, like we talked about, Capernaum. The family moved to Capernaum maybe, and this is where they're at. Maybe this is more in the Nazareth area. So these are people going, this is Jesus? This is like, where did he learn this stuff? Wasn't this the kid that used to run around the neighborhood? We know his family. We know who his parents are and his siblings. Now, a couple of things I want to point out on this one that are important for us to look at. In verse 55, it says, it calls him the carpenter's son. The Greek word for carpenter is actually tekton, which can mean stone worker or house builder. So not just somebody who builds with wood, but someone who can build with stone, maybe a mason. So maybe Joseph was a stone cutter. He had more masonry skills than carpentry skills. Now, the other thing in here is we get the names of 4 brothers of Jesus. So verse 55 actually gives us the most accurate understanding of Christ's mortal family. James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas. 4 brothers that Christ had, little brothers, because Christ was the firstborn. And he had sisters. So if you think about it, we've talked about 5 sons and sisters, plural, so at least 2, if not more. So Mary had like 7 or 8 children in her lifetime. And these people have known this family, basically, and that's why they're astonished that, is this Jesus? Are you sure? We know his family. Jesus is saying these things, like, where did he get all this from? So in their mind, they're seeing Jesus as mortal, like the rest of them, and they're going, how did this mortal learn these amazing otherworldly things? Rather than think about him as the Son of God, because if you did think of him the Son of God, you'd go, oh, well, it makes sense he knows what he knows. Now, verse 57, and they were offended in him. But Jesus said unto them, a prophet is not without honor, save in his own country and in his own house. So the people struggled to accept the message because they knew Jesus' family. Not to say that his family had a bad reputation, but they didn't see them from this standpoint of probably like class. These are poor people. These are workers. These are lowly people. How did they get this amazing understanding that just blows away the priests? Like, Christ is putting himself higher than the priests, and so that from the caste standpoint, the idea of you stay in your lane type thing. Christ is not staying in his lane. He is breaking out of it, and it's astounding the people, but it's conflicting with their cultural understandings. And they're struggling to understand properly who Christ is, because culturally they think he's just another worker, not a rabbi, not somebody we put up at a higher level, like the Pharisees and Sadducees. He's speaking as if he's better than the Pharisees and Sadducees, like his wisdom is phenomenal. But we don't see him that way. So their conceptions of the culture are blocking their ability to understand Christ better. So that's something we need to be careful with. As we study the gospel, is our ideas of culture and tradition blocking us from understanding the gospel more? We want to be careful. So because of this, because they struggled to understand who Christ was, verse 58, and he did not many mighty works there because of their unbelief. They just couldn't wrap their brain around Christ being the Messiah. So he wasn't able to do much for them as far as miracles and things, because it wouldn't have made sense. It wouldn't have worked for them. So some interesting points we get out of this chapter. I hope you've enjoyed this chapter. I'd love to hear in the comments, what do you think of these parables? How do you, as we've talked about this, does it change in your mind how you think about what this life is about when you look at these parables? So I look forward to going over your comments, and we'll see you also in the next chapter.